When it comes to movies in general, especially those who do very well at the box office, more often than not, especially nowadays, they're going to become a sequel. And they're going to eventually become big franchises, or at least that's the hope and the goal for some. But the question is that more often than not, we do see a trend of sequels being not on par with, of course, the original movies. And of course, with Walt Disney Animation releasing 2 sequels within the next 2 years, with this year being Moana 2, and the year after that going to be Zootopia 2, the question becomes for Disney is, what makes sequels better than the original? Hey friends, welcome to Disney Pastor. I'm your host Tim. I talk all things Disney, which includes Disney sequels. This question is something that I've been kind of wrapping my head around for a little bit of time. I've been rewatching the Star Wars movies, and in rewatching The Empire Strikes Back, I also have recently watched Toy Story 2, as well as of course, Captain America, The Winter Soldier, all of those recently, and it made me think there are actually several ways that sequels are better than the original. Now, this is not the case for every sequel, and in fact, we're going to be diving into some of the good examples and even some bad examples of how sequels do this poorly. Now, the hope of this is that with, of course, sequels on the rise, not just at Disney, but in general, is that when we get these movies, that they will be better, if not the same quality as the original. It's not always the case, but that is the hope. So what are these things that make sequels better? Let's dive in. The first thing I think of when it comes to sequels is they expand the world that we live in. When you take a look at The Empire Strikes Back, I think this is a very clear example of this. Where did we leave off in A New Hope, right? The rebels won, great, hooray, but they still are on the run. The Empire is this big looming threat that obviously they will need to find a new base. So where do we pick up in The Empire Strikes Back? They have a new base. And because of that, we get to see just how the story progresses from there. We expand the world set by George Lucas in the original Star Wars, with The Empire Strikes Back discovering new planets. In this movie, we do not have a single old planet. We return, of course, back to Tatooine in Return of the Jedi, but that's the only case of this happening. Every single planet that is in Empire Strikes Back is brand new. The only familiarity is our characters, and that is something definitely very interesting. Even along with that, they add new characters into it as well, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But we take a look at, say, Captain America and the Winter Soldier. It expands on a lot of who S.H.I.E.L.D. is, because we don't really see too much of it in Phase 1. The most we get is from the Avengers, but we don't see too much of S.H.I.E.L.D., how it operates, I'd say, until Captain America, the Winter Soldier. We get to see a lot more of the details and how it works, and specifically, how massive it is. We get to see those things from this point of view. Again, expanding the world. We also, of course, get a new location, that being Washington, D.C., which we don't really see except for one small part in Iron Man 2. The other thing to note here is that when expanding the universe, expanding the world that is being built here, you have to do things that make sense. That's the only way it'll fit. For example, if we go back to Empire Strikes Back, it makes sense that the rebels are on the run, right? Again, the Galactic Empire is out to get them, especially since they did something pretty courageous in destroying the Death Star. Okay, so the Empire is after them with all tenacity. So of course they're going to find a desolate planet that no one's going to want to go to. That makes sense for, of course, that movie. When you take a look at, say, Toy Story 2, it makes sense that there is a toy store with a bunch of toys and a collector of toys. I mean, if you take a look behind me, I collect a lot of different things, so I understand that point of view of there are collectors in the world. Now, I do not condone any of Al's actions, because that is cruel, and why would you steal another kid's toy? But there is something to be said that there is, of course, people and these characters that they do exist, and that's something Toy Story 2 does well. It also makes sense that we get to find out where Woody comes from. We get a lot of Buzz's origins in Toy Story, and we get a lot of Woody's origins in Toy Story 2. We get to see where he comes from, but it does fit the overall story, and it makes sense in how they do it. A bad example of this would be Cars 2.
Let me at him! Let me at him!
Now, I know there is a large group of people that absolutely love Cars 2. In fact, the Grand Prix makes total sense to me, right? They expand the world from just little Radiator Springs, or really just California in general, and they expand it to the rest of the world. We get to experience many different locations and places and different countries, which is cool. That makes sense. And it adds another layer to the universe of Cars. The problem here is that the jump from racing to spies, I think for that moment is a little too big of a leap. Now, do I think it's cool? Absolutely. I do still want a Disney Plus series about these spies. I think it would be really, really cool. Disney, I want it. Please give it. That being said, you have these two stories, and we'll talk about this later, that conflict, and they try the best to kind of mesh them together, but it's the cost of the world building and it making sense is what we lose, particularly with Cars 2. Now, it's not to say that either theme or either subject is bad. Both are good. Both together may be too big of a leap, and that is where the issue comes in with that movie in particular. And while this sequel may not be as good as the original, Avatar: Way of Water actually does this very well. The idea of there being different tribes of the Na'vi actually makes a lot of sense. And while I prefer the original Avatar over Way of Water, how they continue to build that world makes sense. Ultimately, in any sort of world building for sequels, there has to be things that make sense and that fit in that world that make you say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. A Jedi Master in Dagobah, yeah, that kind of makes sense because he's hiding. I mean, it makes sense now because we have, the prequel trilogy, and, that definitely helps. But to go to this mysterious place where this, little small green creature lives who happens to be a Jedi Master, yeah, it makes sense and feels lived in for The Empire Strikes Back. Again, these things are important, otherwise your sequel is going to fail, and we've seen that unfortunately a lot of times. The other thing is the strengthening of characters. This is evident in every sequel that comes up. We see character arcs for these characters. They go through their own journeys. One of the biggest things I think here is Han and Leia's relationship. Now, there isn't anything I'd say super obvious of like, oh, there is something there in A New Hope for Han and Leia, but there is this sort of, oh, there could be something here. It's not a definite, but there could be something here that will help drive the narrative and drive these two characters in their own journeys. And what we see in Empire Strikes Back in particular is that they strengthen these two characters and push them towards one another to become a couple, and they go through their ups and downs, which of course is going to happen. You want to build tension in relationships to add some sort of drama into it, and this drama goes pretty much all the way until, of course, Han Solo dies in The Force Awakens, which I'm still not over, and having rewatched it the other night doesn't help that. But that's besides the point. What is the point, though, is we see these characters strengthen. We see both their individual arcs through the movie, but we also see how they come together, and of course it is done in a climactic moment with this.
I love you.
I know.
So beautiful and so well done. The other is Woody. I think he is another great job in Toy Story 2 that strengthens the character. In Toy Story, the first one, like I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of Buzz. This one is a lot of Woody and Woody's origins. He's recognizing his own self and his role, but also his role for Andy. And it strengthens him so much more to how we see him in Toy Story 3, and it even carries him through to Toy Story 4 as well. So, you have those things there that help drive the story, but also, again, it strengthens the character. Woody becomes a much greater character in Toy Story 2 because of the journey he goes through than just in Toy Story. I think the most clear example of this, at least that I've seen, is going to be Captain America. In the first Avenger and the Avengers movie, he's cool, right? I like his character, but the second he kicks the guy off of the ship, there's a sense of, oh, this Cap is different. And we see him be much more technical in how he fights. He's much more methodical, is the best way to put it. But we see that, because we also get this a little bit in dialogue, he studied different fighting techniques, and so that allows him to perform better on the field. And we see him just as a character strengthen from this good guy wanting to do right. He still very much is that. He's still this good guy who wants to do right. That's not changing. That's arguably the bigger parts of his character, but he is different, and I'd say so much better than he is in the first Avenger and the Avengers. He is so much better. And in fact, because of this movie, it helped launch him into my favorite Marvel character ever. They took the foundation of what made Captain America great, and they, as Imagineering likes to say, plussed it. They plussed Captain America to make him even better than he was. And now, because of that, he is a beloved character. I'd argue not just in superheroes, but also just a beloved character. Unfortunately, I do have a bad example here, and it's gonna be from Ralph Breaks the Internet. This film frustrates me for a lot of different reasons. One of them is the relationship we see between Ralph and Vanellope. Ralph's relationship with Vanellope doesn't change, but Vanellope's relationship with Ralph changes so dramatically. And I mean, granted, that's part of her story, but even when before we see her kind of go on her own adventure, her character is so different with her relationship with Ralph than it was in Wreck-It Ralph, that it's like, what happened between those two movies? The other thing is too, is you want to change the character. You want to add more to the character. You want the character to evolve. You want him to go through different things. You take a look at Tony Stark. You take a look at his entire arc through the MCU, and he learns from his mistakes. Every time we see him have one mistake, and he corrects it the next time. And we see that gradually over time. And granted, that helps because you have a shared universe. He appears a lot more than just, 2 movies. But what you want is a gradual change. Luke Skywalker's another great example. He gradually changes. Woody, he gradually changes. Vanellope, they tried too much too fast. She felt very, very, very different than when we left her in Wreck-It Ralph. In strengthening characters in the sequel, you want them to change and evolve, yes, but you want to do it in a way that makes it feel realistic rather than over-ambitious. The other thing is exploring deeper themes. We see this a lot in sequels as they explore deeper themes. Maybe they go a little bit tonally dark. You take a look at the first Avenger and Winter Soldier. They're 2 totally different movies. Winter Soldier is more of like a political thriller, and First Avenger is, punching and kicking bad guys, mainly Nazis, and it's cool. They're totally different, and they explore darker themes of who do you trust in Winter Soldier. And it's really cool to see, and it's done very well, and he puts you on the edge of your seat sometimes. That's plussing and adding deeper themes. And you take a look at The Empire Strikes Back, and it goes deeper themes. You're talking about love. You're talking about a deeper connection and focus on the Force. We see Luke struggle with just different things and overcoming his demons and dealing with challenges. And so what is done very well in a lot of these sequels is we see deeper themes. Toy Story 2 is another great example, is that we see the realization of what happens when your kid grows up. And I love how the movie ends, because it's, you know what? He's going to grow up one day, but we're going to be with him every single step of the way. That's beautiful. And then, of course, we get to Toy Story 3, and we see that realization, and now we're all depressed. It's done so well in this movie of handling these deeper themes. You take these characters, you take this thing you know and love, and you bring it in just a little bit deeper into the water. And in these cases, it flourishes. Now, for example, I don't really see that in like Cars 2. I mean, sure, it's a complicated spy thriller, but in all seriousness, we don't really see too many deeper themes. I mean, yes, we have all the spy stuff, and we see Tow Mater go through an arc. Yes. But in terms of taking our characters deeper, we don't really have that. I mean, we see some relationship tension between McQueen and Mater, but that's about it. And in sequels, you want to dive in deeper to these characters, dive in deeper to this story, take deeper themes, and that one doesn't do that. Ralph Breaks the Internet does, but the execution is very lackluster and is very annoying and also very stuck in 2018, which is very unfortunate for the movie. Not every sequel can do this very well. Sometimes you do an overabundance of themes. You want to take this character deeper, you want to do this, you want to do this. A great example of this is Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 does a lot of different things. One, it is exploring more of Tony Stark, who he is. He's also dealing with, palladium in his chest and that issues. He also has the relationship with Pepper that he's trying to figure out. And then he also, of course, has the government hounding him to take back his suits, which are his and not the government's. And then, of course, you have the villain of Ivan Vanko, and you have that whole tie-in of, he used to work with his dad, but then you also have S.H.I.E.L.D. on top of that and introducing that to everybody in Director Fury. We get introduced to Black Widow, which is cool, but it's also a Avengers setup. And then, of course, you also have all the stuff with Tony reconciling with his dad via, tape recorder in a sense. Oh, and then also on top of that, you also have the introduction of War Machine and, him and Rhodey's relationship, him being Tony, of course. That's a lot going on. And the issue is that only a few things and a few plot points, a few themes can go deeper for these characters. And that's just too much. You can't do everything in a movie. You just can't. George Lucas learned this. There's way too much ideas he had, so he decided to make a trilogy. And then after that, he had more ideas, so he made another trilogy. And then he had ideas for the sequels, but they weren't fleshed out yet. You want to pick the right things to bring not only your characters deeper, bring your story deeper, but bring the audience deeper. So that's one thing Empire Strikes Back does very well. It has a few themes, and these things, each of them, go deeper. And they all intertwine a little bit too. And it's really, really cool. Iron Man 2 does not have that. You have several themes, yes, but only a few go deeper. And some of them do intertwine. But a lot of the times you have a lot of standouts, particularly in that movie. And so the themes don't go as deep as you may want it to. One of the other things here is that you want to do things unexpected. You want to keep audiences guessing, leave them surprised, leave them anticipating, not knowing exactly what you plan on doing. Leaving a few surprises are always a good thing. The other thing is too, is it has to fit into the world. It has to make sense. And it can't be something that splits everybody. And you take a look at The Last Jedi, I think is a perfect example of this. Whether you like them or not, it split the audience. Either you love it or you hate it. And then there's a few that are this is okay, but it isn't great. What I love about, we'll use Empire Strikes Back again as the example, is it did things unexpected. You have the greatest plot twist in all time in movie history. It is done very well. That's it. The bad guys win. It's unexpected. Last Jedi, I don't think does that. It
Continuing story of our band of heroes. Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, C-3PO, R2-D2, and Chewbacca.
You don't want to do that to your audience, especially when it comes to a franchise that you're trying to build. Captain America the Winter Soldier does this again. S.H.I.E.L.D. collapses, Hydra's back. And it sets up a ton of ramifications for the future of the MCU. Unexpected, surprising, brings you to the edge of your seat. Those are done well. And what the difference is with, say, something like Empire Strikes Back's unexpectedness or Winter Soldier's unexpectedness compared to, say, something like The Last Jedi, is that it fit within the story. The challenge is that anything you do Star Wars-wise nowadays, you're going to face a lot of different opinions. But that is something to note, is you want to leave people wanting more. So the question then becomes, well, will every sequel be better? No, it won't. As much as we may want it to be, my hope and goal is that when sequels are created, because eventually they will, is that they are as good, maybe even sometimes better than the original. That will not always be the case, but the biggest thing, regardless of how well they execute the world building and enhancing that, and enhancing the story and strengthening the characters and taking deeper themes on and even creating a banger of a soundtrack, The biggest thing that every sequel needs to do is honor the original. Honor the original in a way that makes the sequel feel good, even if you may not enjoy it as much. What I love about the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise is when you take a look at specifically Pirates 1, 2, and 3. The first one is honored very well so that the sequels are set up to succeed. And they did. They did succeed. They were great movies. Empire Strikes Back honors what came before it and plussed it. Same thing with Captain America, same thing with Toy Story. And not every sequel gets to do that, but that's the end goal, is you have to honor the original and build on what was there. If you scrap everything and start from a brand new foundation, you're going to lose. But if you build on what made the original special and you plus it, more often than not, your sequel can and probably will succeed. Anyways, that's just my thoughts on what can make sequels good. This is not the end all be all list of anything. These are just things and points that I've noticed in rewatching a lot of movies as of late. Let me know down in the comments below, what to you makes a sequel good? I would love to hear it and love to chat with you guys on more Disney things. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a big thumbs up. I greatly appreciate it. Helps me know what you like, what you don't like. And if you're new around here, be sure to subscribe down below and hit the bell to be notified for more videos just like this one. I will see you all in the next video. I hope you guys have a great day. Goodbye.